You don't live in a democracy. You live in a financial system, one that governs not through crowns or armies, but through credit, contracts, and compliance. Money isn't just a tool of exchange. It's a system of control more complete than any dictatorship, more pervasive than any empire. Because while political power requires visible force to maintain itself, financial power operates invisibly, making you police your own enslavement through debt obligations, credit scores, and the perpetual need to earn currency that the system creates and destroys at will. This is the money trap. Not that you need money to survive, but that the money system itself has become the mechanism of your slavery, and you maintain it voluntarily because you cannot imagine an alternative. The Sabio Observer recognizes that this transformation happened gradually over centuries, so slowly that each generation never questioned the fundamental shift taking place. From tangible wealth you could hold gold, silver, land-to-paper promises representing that wealth, to debt-based money created from nothing, to purely digital abstractions that exist only as numbers in computer systems. At each stage, power concentrated further away from the people and closer to those who controlled the money creation process. The financial elite didn't conquer nations through military force. They conquered through debt that nations willingly accepted, through banking systems that governments adopted, through monetary policy that became more important than any legislation politicians could pass. And now, we stand at the final evolution. Programmable money, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, where power isn't just embedded in institutions, but literally coded into the currency itself. Money that can be programmed to expire, to be spendable only on approved purchases, to be frozen or confiscated instantly without trial, to track every transaction you make and connect it to your identity permanently. This isn't dystopian fiction. It's being implemented right now by central banks globally, under the banner of efficiency, security, and modernization. The money trap is closing completely, and most people don't even realize they're inside it because the cage is invisible. Stick with me, and I'll expose exactly how we went from wealth we controlled to money that controls us, why the transition from monarchs to bankers represented the most significant power shift in human history, and what CBDCs mean for whatever freedom remains. Ready to see the bars of your financial prison? Let's trace the evolution of monetary slavery. Let's start with what money used to be versus what it became, because this transition is the foundation of modern slavery disguised as financial sophistication. For thousands of years, wealth was tangible. You could hold it, store it, verify it without trusting anyone else. Gold and silver couldn't be created by governments. They had to be mined, which limited supply naturally. Land couldn't be printed. Possession was 9/10 of ownership. This meant power was distributed. Yes, kings controlled territory and armies, but they couldn't create wealth from nothing. They had to tax or conquer to obtain it. The people had something real that couldn't be inflated away by decree, couldn't be confiscated without physical force, couldn't be manipulated through monetary policy that didn't yet exist. But the shift began in medieval China and later, Renaissance Europe, with the innovation of paper credit notes representing claims on gold or silver held elsewhere. This seemed convenient. Instead of carrying heavy metal, you carried light paper. But this convenience came with hidden cost. Now your wealth existed as a promise rather than a possession. You held paper that said someone owed you gold, but you didn't hold the gold itself. This created the foundational vulnerability that the modern debt system would exploit completely. Because paper can be issued in excess of the underlying metal, and it was, governments discovered they could print more notes than they had gold to back them, creating inflation that destroyed the wealth of anyone holding the notes while enriching whoever issued them first and spent them before prices rose. The critical moment came in 1694 with the founding of the Bank of England, the first modern central bank explicitly created to manage government debt. The English crown needed money to fight wars but couldn't tax enough to fund them. So private bankers proposed a deal. They would lend the government money created through issuing notes, and in return, they would receive interest payments guaranteed by future taxation of the public. This was the birth of the debt-based monetary system. From that moment, governments no longer needed to tax first, then spend. They could borrow, spend immediately, and burden future generations with the debt repayment. The roles of power shifted fundamentally. Monarchs became dependent on bankers for financing, and bankers gained influence over national policy through the leverage of debt. The people, meanwhile, were converted from citizens into taxpayers whose purpose was generating revenue to service government bonds held by the financial elite. This wasn't visible conquest. It was financial enslavement through debt that looked like progress, because it enabled government spending and economic growth. But the growth was built on credit expansion that could only be sustained through perpetual debt increase, which required perpetual taxation, which meant the population had to work perpetually to service obligations they never personally agreed to, but inherited by birth. The money trap had been set. Gold and land, which common people could own and pass to children, were slowly replaced by paper currency and debt that transferred wealth from the many to the few who controlled credit creation. Now let's examine how paper promises evolved into pure abstraction. Because the 20th century completed the separation of money from anything real, making it entirely a tool of control rather than a store of value. The Bretton Woods system after World War II attempted to maintain some connection to reality by pegging global currencies to the dollar, which was supposedly backed by gold at $35 per ounce. But even this thin connection was abandoned in 1971, when President Nixon closed the gold window, admitting that the U.S. didn't have enough gold to back the dollars it had printed. From that moment, money became purely fiat backed by nothing except government decree and the faith that others would accept it. This is the modern economy's foundation. Your money is valuable only because everyone believes it's valuable, and that belief is maintained through force, legal tender laws, and necessity. Taxes must be paid in government currency. But here's the deeper mechanism that most people never grasp. In this purely fiat system, money is created through debt, and debt is created by banks, which means banks control the money supply more than governments do. When you take a mortgage, the bank doesn't lend you money that exists. They create new money by issuing you credit, which becomes a new deposit in the economic system. Over 90% of money in circulation was created this way through commercial bank lending, not through government printing. This means the banking system, not elected officials, determines how much money exists, who gets access to it, and what conditions are attached. The central banks set the rules, interest rates, reserve requirements, capital standards, but commercial banks execute the creation process through lending decisions that are driven by profit, not public interest. And because all money is created as debt-bearing interest, the total debt always exceeds the total money supply. This creates the mathematical impossibility we discussed earlier. Debt cannot be fully repaid because the interest money was never created, which means the system requires perpetual debt expansion to function, which requires perpetual economic growth, which requires perpetual resource consumption, which is hitting planetary limits while wealth concentrates into fewer hands through the compound effect of interest flowing from debtors to creditors across generations. The modern economy isn't designed to create prosperity for all, it's designed to extract wealth through debt servitude disguised as opportunity. You're not a citizen in this system, you're a revenue source. Your labor doesn't earn you wealth. It earns you currency whose value the system controls. Your savings don't represent stored wealth. They represent claims on future production that can be inflated away. Your debt isn't a temporary obligation. It's the permanent state required for money to exist. This is complete financial control operating invisibly because the cage is built from abstractions, debt, credit, numbers, and computers rather than physical chains. But the next evolution makes even this abstraction look like freedom. Let's confront the final stage of monetary evolution. Central bank digital currencies, which represent the complete merger of money and surveillance, value and control, currency and coding. CBDCs aren't just digital versions of current money, we already have digital payments through cards and apps. CBDCs are programmable money issued directly by central banks, meaning every unit of currency would be traceable, controllable, and subject to rules embedded in its code. The implications are staggering and terrifying. Money that expires after a set time to force spending, money that can only be used for approved purchases, money that's automatically taxed or frozen based on your behavior, money that connects your financial life to your digital identity permanently. China is already implementing this through its digital yuan, which tracks every transaction, links to social credit scores, and can be programmed with restrictions on use. The European Central Bank is developing the digital euro with similar capabilities. The Federal Reserve is researching a digital dollar while pilot programs run globally. The justifications are always the same: efficiency, security, fighting money laundering and terrorism, bringing banking to the unbanked. These sound beneficial, but the real function is control. With CBDCs, The financial elite don't just control the money supply and interest rates, they control individual money on a per-user basis. Dissidents can be financially erased without trial. Purchases deemed inappropriate can be blocked automatically. Savings can be penalized through negative interest rates programmed into the currency itself, forcing consumption to maintain economic growth. This is the culmination of the journey from gold to paper to debt to code, power embedded directly into money itself. No longer do rulers need armies to enforce compliance or institutions to process control. The currency itself becomes the mechanism of total surveillance and absolute power. You won't be able to make a purchase the system disapproves, save money beyond allowed limits, transfer funds without permission, or exist economically outside the controlled system. And unlike previous forms of monetary control where you could at least use cash privately or barter outside the system, CBDCs eliminate all escape routes by making alternative forms of transaction obsolete or illegal. The money trap closes completely. Your economic existence becomes entirely dependent on remaining compliant with a system whose rules can change instantly through code updates, whose decisions are automated rather than human, and whose control is total, because it's built into the very currency you need to survive. This isn't conspiracy theory or distant future, this is being implemented now, sold as innovation. And most people welcome it because digital payments are convenient, and they don't see the cage being built around them until it's locked. The transition from monarchs to bankers took centuries. The transition from bankers to algorithms will take years. And once established, there will be no revolution possible, because revolution requires resources, and resources require money, and money will be programmable by those you're trying to oppose. So there's the complete evolution, from tangible wealth you controlled, to paper promises representing wealth, to debt-based money created by banks, to pure abstractions tracked digitally, to programmable CBDCs where control is embedded in code itself. At each stage, power concentrated further from the people and closer to the financial elite who control money creation and policy. We didn't become slaves through conquest. We became slaves through accepting increasingly abstract forms of money that gave us convenience while taking our sovereignty. The money trap worked because each generation normalized the new system and forgot what the old freedom felt like. The question you face is whether you'll resist the final stage, CBDCs, or accept them the way previous generations accepted paper money and debt-based banking. Because once money becomes programmable, resistance becomes nearly impossible. How do you protest when your money can be frozen? How do you organize when every transaction is tracked? How do you live outside the system when cash is eliminated and crypto is regulated or banned? The financial system doesn't need your consent anymore. It just needs you to keep using money, and you have no choice but to do that because modern survival requires it. Here's what I need you to do. Research whether your country is developing a CBDC and what stage of implementation it's at. Most central banks are actively working on this, but public awareness remains low because they announce it as technical infrastructure rather than revolutionary change. Understand that once CBDCs are implemented, there's no going back. The infrastructure for total financial control will exist, and whether it's used benignly or malignantly will depend on political leaders you have no way to control. And if this video exposed how we went from wealth we controlled to money that controls us, subscribe to this channel right now, because the money trap is closing, and understanding how we got here is the first step to seeing what's being built around us. You don't live in a democracy. You live in a financial system, and that system is about to upgrade its control mechanisms beyond anything previous generations faced. The only question is whether anyone will notice before it's too late.